President, we want to welcome you here today. We're very happy that you chose the Royal Oak campus as the venue for your jobs announcement, and I suspect the best thing to do is to move forward with that so that we can spend as much time on the delivery and response as far as the information is concerned. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Representative Townsend, nice to meet you.
Thank you. Appreciate your being such a great host. We really appreciate being able to come here. Well, I'm Jim Townsend. I'm state representative from Royal Oak and Madison Heights, and I'm here to talk to you about the Hire Michigan First package. Michigan's families are hurting. Corporate outsourcing, downsizing, along with the loss of our manufacturing base, have taken a heavy toll on the middle class in our state. Many have lost the job they depended on to put food on the table, and some are at risk of losing their health care and even their homes because of the loss of a job that was through no fault of their own. Our workers and families deserve better. That's why House Democrats have been working for years to pass the Hire Michigan First plan. This plan ensures that taxpayer dollars create jobs for Michigan workers, not people from other states and other countries. We've got to make sure that Michigan workers get the first crack at the jobs that our tax credits are creating. Now, in the past, the House has passed this legislation in the last 4 years on numerous occasions. But unfortunately, Republicans in both the House and the Senate have made it their priority to stand in the way of this legislation instead of standing up for Michigan workers. They've gutted this package. They put provisions that have made it weak and prevented it from becoming law. They've made our workers wait long enough, and now it's time for us to act. So we're here today to say that we're going to stand up and continue the fight for Michigan workers. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Tomorrow we will reintroduce the Hire Michigan First plan to make sure that when taxpayer dollars are used to create jobs, Michigan residents benefit. Michigan will spend nearly $3 billion this year to diversify Michigan's economy and attract job providers through tax credits. The problem is that we have no way of knowing how many jobs for Michigan residents are being created by these tax credits. Hire Michigan First will enable the state and the public to see whether the incentives we have on the books are actually creating the jobs that were promised when they were first enacted. Without this legislation, it's anyone's guess as to what the impact is. Now, the governor is championing what he calls performance-based budgeting, and we agree with that idea. There's no better place to start than with tax incentives. We need to look at whether these tax incentives are performing the way they were marketed when they were created. And this is a great place to begin. And this legislation will allow us for the first time to know whether we're getting our money's worth for our tax incentives. Now more than ever, state leaders need to work together to make sure that each and every tax dollar is being spent wisely. We must do everything we can to work together to create an environment where jobs are plentiful and where Michigan workers are back to work. It's clear that we have a lot of work to do in this regard, and it's very important that we work together across partisan lines to solve our state's economic problem. But bipartisan talk is not good enough. We need bipartisan action, and that's what the Hire Michigan First legislation is all about. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move very quickly with this package so that the promises we've made to our constituents to work together to solve the state's economic problems, that we deliver on that promise. Now I'd like to turn this over to State Representative Lisa Brown to get into the details about the Hire Michigan First package. Lisa, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Townsend. Imagine for a minute how painful it is for a displaced Michigan worker to see someone from Ohio or Indiana take a job that his or her taxpayer dollars created, a job that they are perfectly qualified to do and that they need in order to provide for their family. That's a reality that many of our workers have been living with for years. It's not right, and it doesn't make sense. Michigan has the best workforce in the country. When Michigan uses taxpayer dollars to award tax breaks and other incentives, we should make sure that our residents and workers benefit. And that's exactly what Hire Michigan First is all about. Our plan rewards companies that hire Michigan workers. The plan does this by giving these companies priorities in the awarding of grants, loans, and tax abatements from state economic development programs. The more Michigan workers a company hires, the better its chances of receiving economic development incentives. Our plan also makes sure that Michigan workers are the ones building state buildings. Right now, businesses with contracts for the construction of state buildings only have to hire 50% of their workers from Michigan. That's ridiculous. Our plan increases that to 100%. If you're building a state of Michigan building, you have to use workers from the state of Michigan. It's that simple. When we create jobs and protect taxpayer dollars, we're supporting our working families, and that helps drive our economy forward. We need to send a clear message. Taxpayer dollars should be used to create jobs for Michigan workers. And now I'm going to bring up State Representative Ellen Cogan-Lipton to talk about other parts of the Hire Michigan First plan.
Thank you, Lisa. The Hire Michigan First plan is about bringing common sense to state government by making sure we put Michigan workers first, and increasing the accountability and transparency that is severely lacking in the way Michigan awards its tax incentives. As we stated earlier, Michigan will spend nearly $3 billion a year on tax incentives, but we have no way of knowing how many jobs we're getting for Michigan workers, or if even these tax incentives are working. And to me, that means that the state is not doing its job. Our workers and our citizens deserve better. They deserve to know exactly what they're getting with their taxpayer dollars, especially in these challenging economic times with scarce state resources. We must make sure that every taxpayer dollar is used wisely and effectively to support our residents. The Hire Michigan First plan will make sure that our workers benefit from the jobs that their tax dollars help create. It will require companies receiving economic development tools like tax incentives to report who they are hiring and to make sure, indeed, that they are hiring Michigan workers. This, of course, brings transparency and accountability in state government that our taxpayers deserve, and it makes sure that companies are putting Michigan workers first. And under this plan, companies that intentionally break the law will be subject to strict new penalties. These could include being required to pay their tax incentive dollars back and being barred from receiving state contracts in the future. Again, state taxpayer money should go toward creating jobs for Michigan workers. We can't turn our back on our citizens, and we must provide our local workers with as many employment opportunities as possible, and this plan does that. And now I'd like to hand it back over to Representative Townsend to wrap things up.
Well, I'm just going to briefly just sort of sum up. The Hire Michigan First plan is really about getting serious when it comes to rewarding businesses that are creating jobs in Michigan. We are in a fiscal crisis in this state. We've got to do everything we can to make maximum use of taxpayer resources, and we simply cannot afford any longer to be giving tax credits away to companies that are then giving our jobs away to other people from other states and other countries. It's that simple. And I think the people who voted us into office gave us a signal loud and clear that it is time to change the way we do things here in Michigan, and that means making everything we do as a state accountable to scrutiny, and that means looking at everything we do and making sure that it does what was promised. And so the Hire Michigan First package is really about creating accountability and delivering value to the people of Michigan by taking our resources and making sure that we're putting people back to work with our tax policy. So with that, we'd be happy, either any of us, Ellen or Lisa, to answer any questions that any of you may have. Thank you. Any questions?
I do.
Please.
Okay. Well, first of all, does the Hire Michigan First legislation have any Republican co-sponsors? If not, why do you think that is? And if so, who are they? And do you think you can get enough Republican support to actually pass your legislation?
Well, I want to defer to my colleagues who have actually been served here in the last couple of years when the package was before us in the past, so maybe you could speak to that.
As it'll be introduced tomorrow, I think that right now it's just Democratic sponsors, but when we did vote, when the legislation came up last term, there were Republicans who supported the bills in the package, and there's no reason why anyone should be against it. It's actually really good policy, and if people are putting policy before politics, it doesn't matter whose name is on the bill, it's about putting Michigan workers back to work.
The sticking point in the Senate, because it did pass our chamber last session with bipartisan support, but the holdup in the Senate seems to have been over prevailing wage language that was in the bill, and they in the Senate stripped that language out, or requested that it be stripped out, and we of course did not agree to that.
Do you mind taking some questions on a couple other topics?
Well, does anybody have any other questions about anything on this topic? No? Okay. Judy.
Governor Snyder's releasing a report today comparing Michigan public employees' pay and benefits to other states and the private sector. Do you think that's just a way to get the public on the side of reducing pay and benefits of public employees? And if he's successful in reducing public employee pay and benefits, do you think legislators should be subject to the same decreases in pay and benefits? And I guess that's it.
Well, I'll just start with the ending part. As far as legislators, we already voted to cut our pay last term for this term. So which I supported. I think as elected people, we are supposed to set an example. So, today versus 2 months ago, I have a 10% pay cut, and we're contributing more. So I don't know. It's hard to say what Governor Snyder's motive is or what his thing. We don't have a lot of details about. He says things without giving a lot of details behind it. But as far as legislators, we're already doing that. So.
Ellen, you were mentioning a recent study that probably ought to be looked at in addition to anything else that's being put out there. So why don't you describe?
Yeah, the thing about studies, it's very interesting, right? Because you can cite a study, and I do believe, in answer to the first part of your question, that it is. It's part of a setup to make some case that in Michigan our public employees are whatever spin he wants to put on it. The reality is that there are studies, and a recent study was just done by the Pew Center, and it basically says that our public employees, when they're looked and they're ranked as to public employees in other states, we fare corrected for level of education, years spent, that we are sort of middle to even sort of low middle. And so I think that based on that, one could argue that our public employees are actually not paid as much as they should be, or that they would be valued more in other states. So I do believe that that you have to be careful, and I'd be curious to see what study and what factors that who did the study and what factors they looked at, because if it's just sort of gaming the data to have a particular outcome, then it's really not worth the paper that is printed on.
What about private employees? Does that same study speak to the comparison between public and private?
I believe so, actually. I believe so, in Michigan, because it's sort of titled The Wage Disparity Between State and Private Employees. And it tries to correct for level of education, experience, and the conclusion is that our public employees, all of those things being equal, are actually underpaid. as to other states as well as similar education and background in the private sector. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think the fundamental message is, people are interested in good public services and getting value for their money. Rather than it being just faceless public employees, we should really talk about the services that they provide. These are the people that teach our children, that keep our communities safe, that protect us when a disaster happens. They make sure that our communities are well run, and that what are we about to get? We're about to get a foot or more of snow. Well, I think we all are very happy that we have motivated and well-trained public employees to go out and make sure that we can get from point A to point B safely. So, we need, this is a time of austerity, there's no doubt, and we need to make sure that we are competitive, and that, in a time like this, as Lisa said, everybody needs to get a haircut, take a sacrifice, and the legislature obviously has been, taking the lead in doing that, and should continue to take the lead in doing that. But we also do not want to cripple our public sector and put it in a position where it can't deliver the services that we really need. We need the best schools in the country, we need safe communities, and we need a clean environment. If we don't have those three things, we are not going to be able to create jobs here, and that's what we were sent to do, is to change our state's policy so that we can create jobs. And ideology, studies that are skewed in one direction or the other really don't get it done for us. What we need is facts and then some pragmatic solutions.
Can I have one more? Governor Snyder is proposing doing away with the MBT entirely and replacing it with a 6% flat tax that he talked about during the campaign, the corporate tax, which, as I understand it, will blow an even bigger hole in Michigan's budget. Do Democrats have an alternative plan to present and promote to the voters?
You want to?
Yep.
Sure.
So, a couple of things that we looked at in tax policy last session. One of the things about, fundamentally good tax policy is the notion of lowering the rate and spreading the burden. I mean, that's just basic good tax policy. So we looked at looking at expenditures as sort of reverse appropriations, this notion of looking at all of the expenditures and tax credits that we give, which are about $3 billion, roughly.
It's a business, yeah, right.
And looking at those that are possibly no longer needed, no longer useful. Perhaps they have, they've been around longer than they really need to be, and they're not doing the job that they were intended to do. So we looked at that. We looked at a service tax on all services. And we also we looked at I think those were the two major things that we looked at.
Looked at closing some loopholes as well.
Right, that was right, the expenditure side, and then a lower overall sales tax, but spreading it out over services as well as goods. The thing that is very concerning about the governor's plan is that the very groups that were instrumental in negotiating the MBT, large manufacturers and large corporations, they're now basically saying, well, we like this idea of a lower, sort of a flat tax, but wait a second, now we want to have some relief from personal property tax. And now you've got the insurance industry saying, well, now we want some relief from the tax that we have to pay on profits. So now, you're talking about having to now cover a $3 billion plus budget imbalance, and it's just not sustainable. It's just not sustainable.
Is it possible? Because I know in the last session, Mike Bishop, who was then in charge of the Senate, wanted to close the gap by cutting, his cuts only budget. Mm-hmm. Is that still are there still severe cuts like that are being talked about?
Well, I don't think we'll know until we see the governor's budget, and then ultimately see how the House and Senate, respond to what the governor's put on the table. But really, your question really goes right back to the purpose that we're here for today, which is, Higher Michigan First package is really about scrutinizing our tax credits and making sure that they are delivering the value that they're supposed to. And if they're not, then we need to get rid of them. And until now, we haven't really had a tool that allows us to know whether our tax credits are creating jobs or not, whether they're creating jobs for Michigan residents or not. And so this is a step toward giving us that kind of information. The governor has talked about, as I mentioned, value-based budgeting. Are we making sure that we're getting the value for money for the expenditures that we're making? And what Ellen was describing really is a position that we're taking, which is that tax spending and program spending are really spending all in the same. We're really talking about our resources as Michigan residents, and until we pass legislation like Higher Michigan First, we're not going to know whether our tax programs are really working for Michigan residents. Okay.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
A group shot with all of you?